a pleasure to be here today. I didn't have far to come because I live in Albemarle County, Virginia. And I, about 6 years ago, bought what I'll call my fantasy house because it's right on the James River. And that was always my fantasy, to be able to take my boat on my shoulder and be in the river fishing or doing whatever in 3 minutes. So that's pretty exciting for me. I love living there. But it's really great to be with you. I said that already. I'm going to go through a presentation that's going to tell you a little bit of the history of how Save Our Streams kind of moved from an educational program to a true scientific monitoring program. And then what I'm going to do is, as Scott said, talk a little bit about volunteerism and kind of the roles of volunteers, which you guys, that's like preaching to the choir, because all of you are volunteers. No one's getting, I don't think anyone has a salary to be a chapter president or a chapter secretary or the person who does all the cleaning and cooking at the chapter. So what I'm going to talk really about is just some tips for maybe how to grow the program and keep people energized and engaged. And the fact that Save Our Streams is still around and strong and vibrant, that's its own testimonial, really. You haven't let it die. In fact, it's grown really vibrant. And I love the clean water selfies, the people out on the stream. I've checked the website several times and keep seeing different people. And that's really nice to bring the people home. Show who's out there in that creek. Who are those stream monitors? So I'm going to begin with, like I said, looking back. So when I came to guys at Guatemala League, I was really a pretty young lady. I was 21 years old. And I was actually working my way through college. And so I came to Guys at Guatemala League and applied for the position of receptionist. Because I was so young, I didn't have any experience. I didn't have my college degree yet. And I said, well, I'll take this administrative job, but is there something conservation-wise that I could do? Because I'm getting a degree in environmental science, and I want to do something meaty. I had a job already. I was trying to change to come to the league. And they said, well, we have this program called Save Our Streams. You might like that. It's fun. It involves kids. You're practically a kid. You're the youngest staff person. So here's what we have. We'll have this giant mail bag of letters, and we'll just give that to you, and you handle those kids. So I took the job, and I had to field the calls all day long and do all kinds of, sort of cook and bottle washer type tasks, sorting the mail and reading all the newspapers and clipping all the conservation articles. But in looking at that bag of letters from kids, it had sat for a while. So some of those kids' letters were more than a year old. But they were really heartwarming. They talked about, me and my friends went down to the creek, and it was ugly, and it was brown. Is that right? What should we do? Me and my friends went down to the creek, and we saw there was a car in the creek. That's not right, right? And so I said, well, and so there was a lot about trash. There was a lot about the colors, bad smells. Kids are very observant. In fact, they're natural stream monitors without training. And so I would say, well, let's see, they could have a creek cleanup with some adult help. So I made a little fact sheet on how to do a stream cleanup. And then they would write me back and say, well, we've held 3 stream cleanups. Now what's next? And we went down to the post office and we made a club and we invited everyone who came to get their mail to be in our stream club. So I said, wow, these kids are amazing. So I started writing more fact sheets and more things they could do because they wanted to keep going. They wanted to do more than just look at the creek. And eventually this work caught the attention of, believe it or not, Captain Planet, which I, being not a young kid, I didn't know what that was, but it was a cartoon TV show that was on the Turner Network. And so kids really wanted to be like Captain Planet. So Captain Planet actually underwrote our youth program, and they gave our staff all kinds of crazy things like t-shirts that said, I'm Captain Planet, and we had power rings. We had all these gadgets and gizmos, so now when the kids wrote to us, we could turn them into a planet saver. So that was a lot of fun. And so youth is very, very important, and I'm very heartened to follow the youth. I think the league is in good hands with these kids today. But the next question I came upon was sort of looking at what we are doing when we're monitoring a stream. And so at that time we had what I'll call the 3-bug protocol: stoneflies, mayflies, and caddisflies. If you found all 3 of those in a stream, the stream was pretty good. If you found 2 of those organisms, the stream was okay, and only 1 of them, say the caddisfly, the stream was fair. But I noticed there was a lot of other wiggly things in those streams. And perhaps that wasn't quite enough information to really tell what was going on in the water. And at that time, the Ohio DNR, Department of Natural Resources, was looking for a way to monitor their scenic rivers. So they, as part of the state legislation, they can't just designate a river as scenic. They have to tell how it's doing. They have to have some stewardship of it. And so they had come across the fact that the Isaac-Walton League had this monitoring method. Dave Woody had the water wagon, and he had logged 130,000 miles in this Winnebago across the country, teaching kids, and he'd been through Ohio, and he visited every single Ike chapter there. And so Ohio DNR was well familiar with the fact that the league did something with bugs in a stream, and it's something to do with monitoring. But what they brought to the program was they brought a team of really excellent aquatic biologists. So all of a sudden, I had at my disposal a team of aquatic biologists who wanted to do nothing more than create a really good scientific protocol. So I said, let's partner, because you guys at the league know how to engage volunteers. You know how to teach people, and we know science, so let's partner. And so we did, and we wrote a grant proposal to the Virginia Environmental Endowment, and that funded, they have a specific fund just for Ohio. It's Ohio and Virginia. So it has to do with the lawsuit that they won, so they're giving away the proceeds of that lawsuit. Nevertheless, we got the grant, and then we started this program to train volunteers in Ohio. So I went out to Ohio and worked with them in training, and we developed a really nice protocol showing all the different organisms that you might find in the stream, what they meant for water quality. Right? So certain organisms are more sensitive to pollution, like stoneflies and mayflies, and others are more tolerant to pollution, like leeches and aquatic worms and things that can live in almost no oxygen. And so we were able to develop that protocol. And they also showed me how to buy thousands of yards of industrial netting and how to have it professionally sewn at a factory. So we were ramping up. We were into, full-on statewide stream monitoring. And so that was a great experience. And from there, I said, well, it seems great to monitor a stream and know what the condition is, but okay, then what caused that condition? Let's say I go out one time and the water quality is great, and I go back another quarter and it's fair. And maybe the next time it's poor. I don't want to just report that. I need to do something about it. And so I said, let's take the monitoring protocol and let's add things about the watershed. So everyone has to go upstream and look at what's happening upstream. Everyone has to think about those pipes that are sticking into your stream. Are they just draining a farm field? Are they draining a parking lot? Is that a factory pipe? What are those different pollution sources that might be affecting your stream? And you can have a stream in a very rural area that's degraded because it's full of cattle. So it doesn't have to be an urban setting. So we worked on creating little questions, and the trick was, when you're training volunteers, they have to be questions that people can answer. Right? You can't create a form that's so difficult that if you get a PhD, you can fill out the form. So we really needed to make it clear and concise, and so we tested it and we tested it, and we got it to a pretty straightforward condition where people could understand it. The next step then was to think about how we can ensure that volunteers know what they're doing. Right? So you train them, you teach them how to do it, and you don't want to just leave them. You want to make sure they're really doing a good job, so we created a testing protocol. And of course, this helped that I was a college student too at the time, so I was spending a lot of time in the lab. And so I said, well, we need a lab practicum, which sounds really awful. No one wants to do that. So I made it like a game or something. But basically, I collected all the organisms in vials and preserved them. And so we had a test kit. I still have these. This is kind of gross, maybe, but I have them in my shed, and I still bring them out and show people, because I did a great job of preserving them. So it's all the different organisms that you can find, and then you just fill out a test, like, what is in this jar? What is that? And that test was a sort of practicum in the lab, and then also they would go outside and we would observe them monitoring, and I created a little grading sheet. And the purpose of that was not to find people doing a bad job or a good job, was to just make sure they're understanding what they're doing. So if someone's making a mistake, we'd say, hey, simple things like when you pick your net out of the creek, some people really like to be tidy, so they give it a good shake first, and things would fall off of it. So don't do that. Make sure you scoop it from the bottom. So a lot of that was just pretty simple things. But having that protocol in place that we can test volunteers, we can certify them, we can say with a really high accuracy that 90% of our volunteers are really good, 10% are in remedial training, and they'll get those bugs eventually. And if I had somebody, let's say a team, where somebody had poor eyesight, and somebody else was more fit and had great eyesight, we might put them together and say, well, you be in charge of organizing everything, and you be in charge of identifying those tiny little bugs. So that took us to the next phase, which was to then think about how we can take Save Our Streams and expand it to different states. So around that, I'm not going to really play with dates today, but in 1987, the Clean Water Act added provisions for looking at non-point source pollution, runoff pollution. And all of a sudden, states had to be responsible for not just the water quality by a factory discharge pipe, but actually also knowing the quality of water that nobody had ever sampled, right? So maybe out in a rural area, there was no factory there was no wastewater treatment plant, so that no one had tested that stream. And so states were at a loss for how to suddenly dramatically expand their monitoring network to know where runoff pollution was really affecting those streams. And that became a great way for volunteers to help states. So in Virginia, we created the same statewide program that we had in Ohio, except again with the training components and the watershed questions. And so we took folks out, taught them, we worked with the state of Virginia to put volunteers where they were most needed. So we made sure that we had topographic maps at our trainings, and we put people on the segments strategically. So you can have a workshop and ask people where they want to adopt a stream, and everyone might just pick right by my house or my favorite fishing spot. But what we did was say, actually, could you just go upstream a quarter mile, because that's the most strategic spot. We need to be above a certain land use and below a land use to know if that land use is having an impact. So really being scientific about it. Now, if somebody just really wanted to adopt a stream by their house, we didn't say no, of course. But I'll tell you a funny story. We had some fishermen from the North Fork of the Shenandoah, and I remember they called me once and they said, I don't like this Save Our Streams results. This is all wrong. This is a terrible result. We hate our results. I said, what's wrong with your results? I looked at your forms, they look sound. They said, well, they say our water quality is really good and we think it's terrible. And I said, well, where are you guys monitoring? And they said, well, we're just going to these favorite fishing spots we like. They weren't monitoring any of the things where it was polluted. So guess what? They weren't finding pollution. So he said, well, you guys have to be strategic. So that was a key component, was that interaction with the stream monitors. Right? So we created a hotline. I don't even know if it's still active. It was 1-800-BUG-IWLA.
Yep.
All right, I should call it. And the stream doctor would answer the phone. And we found that hotline for us, I don't know what it's like for you guys today, but it was about one half psychology and the other half science. So the psychology was, I'm out in my stream and nobody cares about it and I'm all alone, and and we had this wonderful database we created so we can say, well, you know what? There's a team just upstream of you. Why don't you guys join up together? And we would get these calls back saying, we love each other. We had a barbecue. And so they would end up making these networks of volunteers up and down these stream reaches because we had a database to know where everyone was and we could connect them. So even they might be calling me from Illinois, I could tell them who their nearby monitors were, and then they would get together and form that base of support. And then I think just also telling people they were doing the right thing, that there was somebody out there that really cared, the stream doctor, whoever that was for the day. So after we created this sort of good monitoring protocol, I felt pretty solid about, and states were starting to accept the data. They were using it to prioritize streams. And so, for example, in Virginia, they used that data to add streams to their impaired waters list. And what that meant was those streams now had funding for cleanup. So now they had a stream they didn't even know if it was good, bad, fair, poor, or ugly. Now they knew its condition, and if it was in need of help, they added it to the list. It then was eligible for grant funds and other things. So then projects got done to clean up that stream. So the League's work was leading directly to expanding the network and then also to clean up. Another example would be in West Virginia. They only had 24 or 25 monitoring stations for the entire state. They had tens of thousands of miles of streams, and they had 24 monitoring stations. And they had one person, Doug. I still remember Doug. He was the guy in charge of that, and he had a tent. And he would just drive around the state sleeping in his tent, collecting samples. Doug needed help. And so again, the ICE came to the rescue for poor Doug. And we established monitoring stations across the state, and that volunteer network became the state's official network. The state then hired another biologist, so at least Doug had someone to back him up. And that biologist took our methodology and then also took the EPA, this is, I'm going to get jargon here, Rapid Bioassessment Protocol Level 2, which is stream monitoring with bugs, and compared them side by side. I'm going to test this stream now with the US EPA's official method. I'm trained in that. Then I'm going to take the Isaac-Walton-Leak method and test that same stream. And guess what he found? Our method was right on line with theirs. It showed that our method got the same results as the slightly more complicated EPA method. And that gave me an idea. I said, well, why don't we take this method and actually have our volunteer monitoring certified by the US EPA? Let's go for it. And so working with folks at the US EPA's Office of Water, with folks from Maryland, Save Our Streams, as you guys probably know, I don't want to go into the whole history, but they were the sort of the place where stream monitoring got started. And we worked through all the scientific critique and all the boring, sort of documentation, but we got our method listed as level 2 in the monitoring. And so that meant that any state agency could say that they were following, if they're training volunteers, they were saying, I'm following the US EPA document. I still have that report too. The official one that says Isaac-Walton-Leak is officially approved. I have a lot of stuff in my office. And I actually have, just as a side note, I have kicksand nets, bug boxes, ice cube trays, tweezers, thermometers. I have all that gear in my office because I still take UVA students out into the stream and teach them stream monitoring. So I still do it, and for weird party tricks when my friends come over with little kids, we go monitor the creek in front of my house. And so it's really fun. I still do it. So we expanded the program through Virginia, West Virginia, and then Tennessee. And then we got a call from Louisiana who said, we want to do this too, but we don't have rocky streams. We have muddy bottom streams. So we needed to come up with a new protocol. So they brought us down to Louisiana, and we went out into the muddy bottom streams, and we developed a protocol with a dip net and how to massage logs and kinds of strange ways to get enough samples to rate that stream. And that then became a monitoring protocol for the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, and again, the Louisiana environmental agencies adopted the Save Our Streams Muddy Bottom Sampling Protocol, which I then used to expand to other coastal states. And states such as Washington State, all across the country, started to adopt our methods. I worked and personally went to all the states except the Dakotas and Alaska. Nothing against the Dakotas, I just never got invited to do a training there. But I was quite a road warrior. I lived on the road for weeks at a time. I just would stay gone. I would wander through chapters doing trainings. I would go to schools. My favorite memory of that was visiting the New Ulm chapter. That was a lot of fun because they asked me what it would cost to get me to come out to their chapter. And I said, well, let's think. I actually don't need any salary from them. Well, what can I get from the New Ulm chapter? And I said, how about pay me in beer? Remember, I was 24. So they said, okay, this is a great thing. So I went out there, but they worked me really hard for that beer, let me tell you. So they had me, the first thing, that was where I talked to the 800 students on mic. They took me to a high school, I did the 800 kids, I took a bunch of people stream monitoring. Then I had to be on a radio show, so I didn't even know what's going on. They drove me to a radio station, mic'd me up and said, you're on the air. And then I went to another event, and then at the end of the day, I think it was about 6 o'clock, they drove me out to their brewery. And there was a giant hose that happened to be in the driveway, and they said, well, hook yourself up. I was like, well, come on, really, let's be a little dignified. They said, no kidding. And they took me into the tap room and gave me a tour of this really old brewery and had some beer. That was fun. And when I left, I was packing up to go back to the Isaac-Walton-Leak headquarters. I noticed that my waders were really heavy, like I couldn't lift them. They had filled my waders with sausages and beer in bottles. So I just packed them in my suitcase, and when I was going back to the airport, they, of course, this was before 9/11, so you could take liquid through, but I opened my suitcase and wanted to know what was this, and I was like, waiters. And they said, what is in the waiters? There's something is funny on our screening, and they said, started playing on sausages after sausages. These were big hip waiters. There was a lot of sausage and beer in there. And they just looked at me, and I said, I've been in Minnesota. Oh. What do you expect? And they're like, okay, go ahead. When I got back to the office, you were supposed to write a memo of whatever you did with the Isaac Walton League. You had to write a memo on your trip and what happened. So I wrote my official memo, but I taped it to one of the beers. Maitland Sharp was the executive director at the time. It was hard to get his attention. He was kind of gruff sometimes. So I taped the memo to the beer, put it on his desk. I could hear him laughing all the way down the hall. He then took this beer memo with the bottle still attached and took it to all the staff and showed them the proper attachment for all memoranda. And then me and my staff finished off the beer. Okay, so, and I'm going to tell you some stories about volunteers as well. So we then moved on to thinking about how we could also monitor wetlands. When I started working at the Isaac Walton League, wetlands were called swamps. But really, the word wetland wasn't really used. So we said, how can we expand the protocol for wetlands? And that was pretty complicated. I had to research how to build amphibian traps and all kinds of strange things and plant ID forms, but we created a way for people to go out and watch over their wetlands as well. And then the EPA got very excited about that and created a National Wetlands Award. And so that program also expanded and went very well. And I'm going to tell you now a little bit about some of the tales of what happens when people go out in streams. And these are just my stories from my past. Obviously, you guys have many others. And I have hundreds and hundreds of stories, but Scott said I could not speak for 8 hours. So I'm just going to tell you highlights of a few. And may I also ask that I can have a 15-minute time check? So somebody wave at me when I've got 15 minutes left. Okay. So one of the things I learned from the Isaac Walton League was what was called the six-pack method. Anyone imagine what I'm talking about when I say the six-pack method? The six-pack method was I learned this from Jay Gilliam. And he had been to Virginia. He was somebody who came up through the league and got excited and became a statewide stream trainer for Save Our Streams. But he said, when I go in my stream and I find something's different, something's awry, I take my sample in, it's looking muddy or I'm not getting the right organisms that I should be getting, I ask, what's going on? And so I go upstream, and I know my neighbors pretty well, and I've mapped my watershed drainage area, so I kind of have a sense of what's happening. So I get a six-pack of my favorite beverage, and I go upstream, and I talk to my neighbors, and we sit on the porch, and we have a good old chin wagon about why are you letting the cows in the creek like that? Maybe we could help you by fencing those cattle out. Maybe we could get some volunteers. Or I noticed you were storing some chemicals you're using in your spraying real close to the creek, and they seem to be leaking in there. Maybe we could help you fix that shed or move those chemicals away. So it's always a very gentle, kind, non-accusatory, but just chatting, right? They never started with, why are you polluting the stream? They had some beverages, and then they talked. And so I called that the six-pack method, and that became part of our protocols as well, to advise other volunteers to do, getting to know your neighbors. So Save Our Streams is as much a stream monitoring program as it is a program to bring people together who have common interests. Another group that, another little story I pulled out to tell you today was about these guys called the Bridge Creek Bandits. They're in West Virginia. And who are the Bridge Creek Bandits? I cannot tell you. I'm sworn to secrecy. Why? Because they worked at a coal mine. These Bridge Creek Bandit guys, that was the name for their monitoring team. They were coal miners. And they wanted to make sure their mine was not polluting. And so they said, but if our mine knew that we were stream monitoring the runoff from the mine, we'd get fired. So they were kind of secretive. I don't know what they monitored with masks on or what, but they sent their data in religiously, and we discussed it, and we talked about things they could do. And so they, again, through their work, made sure that the mine was following the best practices. They didn't get in trouble, And we had a very clear understanding at Sabre Streams, never say those guys' names. We had them in a drawer, we knew who they were, but they were called the Bridge Creek Bandit Team. I'll tell you another heartwarming story. There was a case, we've had a lot of cases with Save Our Streams where we found a pollution problem that was pretty severe and nobody knew about it until we got out there with our nets. And so in West Virginia, one time we were doing a training and our general workshop format was to teach people about water quality and then take them outside in the creek to test the water. And when I went to the creek that was supposed to be used for the training, was supposedly clean, it was full of black fly larvae. Black fly larvae in great abundance usually mean there's a sewage leak. There's some kind of sewage contamination. There was also long filamentous black algae. There was things in that creek that told me that there's sewage. And so I said, well, okay, nobody touched this water, it's not safe. I always had gloves that aren't up to my arm, I could take the samples. And the women in the workshop were especially shocked because they were mothers of the children. And we were near a school, and one of the women almost started to cry because her child had been sick for the past year and a half. Her child had been sick because that stream was between the school grounds and the soccer field. And of course it had a bridge over it, but you know what kids are like, right? They see a creek and they want to get in it. That's the first thing they want to do, get in the water. And so they would jump and splash and play in that sewage-filled creek on their way to their soccer practice. And this one child had contracted a terrible illness and had been to the hospitals in West Virginia, to Charleston, and then had been up to Johns Hopkins Hospital up in Maryland, and found that he had been exposed to raw sewage. And the mother kept saying, but my child's not exposed to raw sewage. And they couldn't figure out, and he remained sick. He couldn't be cured. That's because he kept getting re-exposed. So we, of course, used our protocol. We went upstream to look for what might be the source of the problem, and there was a packaged sewage treatment plant. And I don't know if you know about packaged plants, but they're designed to run automatically. EPA hates them because basically you need to have some human there to find out when they fail. So that plant had failed a long time ago, but it had nobody watching it. And so it was just passing all the sewage from the subdivision straight into the creek. So of course that was solved. That was solved. That plant was cleaned up and required to have a person monitoring it. And so that's just an example of how a community suffering with illness for years and nobody knows why, and the importance of having people who are trained to understand about looking upstream for the problem. The other thing I want to mention too is that we started to notice a lot of streams were impaired because they had habitat problems. And habitat problems can occur in a lot of different ways. It doesn't necessarily, there's no, say, discharge that's polluting the stream, but what we found was maybe a farmer decided, back in the 60s, the stream was untidy, and so they need to straighten it out. So we all have big equipment, so go out in the stream and make it nice and straight, like God, nature intended. But actually, nature doesn't like straight lines in streams. So we need meanders, and that's what keeps streams healthy, keeps them oxygenated, provides those deep pools you folks who are fishermen appreciate. And so we needed to restore the habitat of that stream if we're ever going to get it to be healthy again. And so we created a program called Stream Doctor. And I have to give credit where credit is due. The idea to call the restoration program Stream Doctor came from kindergartners. So we had one of our stream monitoring teams was a teacher, and she wanted to take out really little kids. So we had designed a lot of our materials to be for sort of around 5th grade level. And she said, well, I want to take my kindergartners out. So she thought, how can I take them out and teach them something and get them to all, how kindergartners are, they're all crazy, they're all spinning around. How do you focus kindergartners? And so she said, I'm going to give them jobs to do. They've all been to the doctor, they know what that is. So I'm going to take them out in the creek and I'm going to explain their different jobs for them. So some are the emergency medical technicians, and they're the ones who drive the ambulance. So they run to the creek with all the gear. And then we have the doctor, and the doctor diagnoses what seems to be the problem with the creek patient. All right, and then we have the nurses. They help the doctor by gathering data from the patient, which is the creek, of course, and so they gather the bugs. So you have this whole medical motif, and then at the end, they decide, well, what does our creek need? Does it need a long-term wellness plan? You know, it needs rehabilitation, so it needs to have some trees planted on it. Does need emergency medical treatment. It's got a spill in it, and we need to call the, emergency folks in to come and save the patient. So I said, that's really intriguing. Because the streams are kind of like a circulatory system, and we're taking care of them. And so I thought I liked Stream Doctor, because Stream Doctor can prescribe the answer to a lot of our problems. And so that's where the idea came from, and we created a stream restoration manual. I still have that manual also, and we also have a video that goes with it. And one of the things that I found interesting was I got some pushback from some folks at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They said, you can't teach people to fix streams. You can't do that. And I said, well, let me tell you what people are doing right now. People are taking me out and saying, look, I fixed my creek. I got all the old tires, and I made a wall of tires, and that's my stream stabilization project. Or someone else said, I got a whole lot of gabion wire baskets, and I stuck them right in the riffle. They seem really stable. Now, I'm not going to lecture to you guys why you shouldn't put wires in riffles with jumping fish, or why maybe tires are not a natural stream stabilization method. So I said, people are already out there fixing their creeks, so let's teach them how to do it in the right way. And that's where the stream restoration program came from. The next kind of way of thinking that kind of evolved for Save Our Streams was thinking about planning. And that is, my background was in natural resources management. I was not a planner. But people were coming to us more and more with questions about why is my landscape flooding so badly? I know there was some wetlands upstream, but then there was a shopping mall on top of the wetlands now, and everybody downstream seems to be getting flooded out. Is there a relationship there? And I said, well, who's the dum-dum who put a shopping mall on a wetland? Everybody knows wetlands are important for habitat and also for soaking up water and holding water. And then I just kept asking these questions. We did a stream restoration program on a creek in Montgomery County, and we planted these beautiful trees, and we filmed it, and that's part of the video we made, and it was doing great stream buffer work. And then somebody decided in another agency in that same county, so we planted the trees with the Parks Department, and then another agency said, maybe engineering, let's put a stormwater pond there. So they came out and they dug up our trees. They dug our trees and they moved them way back, and they put a stormwater pond next to a creek. Okay? I'm not going to pretend to be a civil engineer right now, but you should not put a stormwater pond next to a live, active creek. That makes no sense. The stormwater pond funds would flood. And also the stream buffer was doing a great job of controlling stormwater. So who's making these dumb decisions? And I said, somebody's missing something here. And then I was really moved by, of all people, Trappist monks. Trappist monks. What do they have to do with this? Well, one day at the Isaac Walton Lake, some Trappist monks came by. They had ventured out of their Holy Cross Abbey in Berryville area, and they came to the Isaac Walton Lake in their full monk regalia. Like a lot of people would drop by the office, but this was a first for me. And they said, we're Trappist monks, we don't talk a lot. In fact, we don't even go outside. We just stay in our abbey and do our monk things. And we need help. We had to leave the abbey and come to Roslyn, Virginia. Wow.
Oh my God.
They were also really impressed at the time. This is where our office was in sort of a converted parking garage at that time. This is before the beautiful national headquarters. And there was a church that was on top of a parking garage, and they were pretty amazed by that, right next to us. But nevertheless, their problem was that somebody had proposed to build a big subdivision right next to their abbey. And they had purposefully moved to this location for peace and quiet, tranquility, reflection, and here was going to be this big golf course. And so they wanted help. And I said, okay, well, I guess we need to see what the plan is for this golf course. So we got the plan for the golf course. And the golf course had some very peculiar things on it. One of the things I noticed was it had a whole lot of septic fields labeled all over the golf course. And I tried to think, well, what would that, I don't understand this. Do you need to go to the bathroom at every hole? It's like literally you're on the 9th hole and there's an outhouse or there's a toilet. I didn't understand this. So I said, this doesn't look like a golf course. This looks like a subdivision plan. I think that they're kind of going to try to get this all permitted. Then we found other problems, like they had a whole list of chemicals they were going to use on this golf course, and some of them were actually banned by EPA. So their chemical list was wrong, their storage was wrong, they're going to do all this destruction. And so I helped the monks make their case for their planning commission and for their supervisors. And they were successful in getting that project stopped. But we learned a lot too about how the bad decision got made in the first place and who was cousins with whom on the board. And it became so corrupt and bizarre. So it really opened my eyes to see that the planning was not sound science. It was really a very corrupt process. And I ended up making a one-act play out of this. I turned it into a play. And I took it and taught it at the governor's school in West Virginia. There's a national governor's school for kids who are the top science kids in their state. Get sent to this camp in West Virginia where they, by their governor, as sort of the outstanding scientists. And so I turned that into a play. And it really got the kids to do it, but I wanted people to understand that saving streams is not just about thinking about the water quality of that stream. You've got to think about who's planning on that larger scale. And unfortunately, that's kind of what led me to leave the Isaac Walton League, because I wanted to be a planner. And I didn't understand what these people were up to or how they were doing it, but I knew I needed to kind of, if you can't beat them, join them. So I said, I'm going to go to planning school and learn about ordinances and master plans and highway planning and all of those things so that I can make sure that the whole watershed is well protected. And that we're not doing silly things, because Stream Doctor was about restoring streams that were damaged. And my question was, how can we keep that stream from being damaged in the first place? I got tired of monitoring problems and fixing problems. I said, let's stop them. Let's stop them right where they start through bad planning. So last night, I'm sure you guys were having fun at your picnic. I'll tell you what I was doing. It's pretty pathetic. I was driving around parking lots around here, looking at the extreme lack of sound 21st century stormwater management. If you wanted to clean up the river, the place to start is the acres and acres of parking lots that we have here. Turning them into permeable pavement, taking those tree islands that are stuck up like this and recessing them so the water from the parking goes right into growing a tree instead of into a drain and right into our river. So planning became for me the sort of part of the answer that I needed to explore. And so now I'm at the University of Virginia, but I also run a nonprofit called the Green Infrastructure Center, where I'm teaching local governments that we need to look at not just gray infrastructure, roads, power lines, pipelines, sidewalks. We need to look at green infrastructure, trees, rivers, soils, all of those things that we also need to have clean air, clean water, and a healthy life. So now I'm going to move into the second part of my talk, which is really just a little bit about best principles for working with volunteers for recruitment and retention. So, key thing to think about is having a purpose. People want to understand why they're doing something. It's really important that they see the big picture. So for example, we don't want to just have folks, monitoring a stream and they're not sure why. And I'm not saying that that's happening here, but I have seen some programs that have taken what the Isaac Walton League has developed and just said, oh, forget about all those other questions about the watershed. Just get some bugs. Just test your stream. And people need to understand why they're doing it. So the primary message is not to say that America's streams lack monitoring. It's to say that streams need river keepers. Right? So remember, river keeping is a centuries-old tradition that came out of England. And Isaac Walton, of course, is a fine Englishman. And so we need to really make sure that people understand that in a sense, they're not just the water testers. They're sort of the watershed managers. They're being given a job to do that's not just looking at data, but also making sure they understand that going upstream, that getting involved in boring things like going to a planning commission meeting and finding out what the comprehensive plan says about their watershed and what's going to happen to their stream in the future. A lot of comprehensive plans say nothing about water. They say, we like rural landscapes, or we like to drink clean water from our treatment plant, but they don't say anything about their streams. They don't even have maps of their watersheds. So really important to focus on getting people to understand that next level. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is allegiance. People really want to belong to something, and you guys understand that better than anyone because you're all members of chapters. But if you're a stream monitor and you're out there by yourself, maybe you're not a member of a chapter, or you feel maybe a little alone. So it's important to let people know they're joining a network of people. I thought the selfies were really cute, but what I wanted to see next on the website was a map that I could click on to see where all those people are. Right, so with crowdsourcing today, it's quite easy for people to say, pinpoint their spot and pop it on a map. And so then if I wanted to say, monitor a stream in Idaho, I could open it up and see where nobody's monitoring, or even better, find some friends upstream who are monitoring who I could join up with. And so a chapter challenge to think about is every chapter in the Azawatn League adopt a stream. Many have, and many have Save Our Streams officers, but let's see if we can have every single chapter have a stream they're monitoring, or if your members are aging, that's the great opportunity to bring in the youth team to work with your chapter to do it. The other thing to think about is having those, I told you those little stories about monks and bandits and kids, but to think about having those success stories popping up on the website so people get excited about what they could do. And then advancement. An average volunteer lasts 2 years. That's what the literature has shown. Then they want to do something different. And so, and maybe with our fast-paced world, maybe they only last a year and 2 months, I'm not sure. But so thinking about all the ways they can advance, from changing them to trainers, being maybe stream planners. Right? Thinking the most successful stream cleanup I ever saw was held in Maryland, and was done by a bunch of old ladies in their 80s. How did old ladies in their 80s do really great stream cleaners? They were great at nagging people. Every year, like your grandma. So they got them for like, would you please bring the Boy Scouts out? We need this cleanup. And they would just organize. And I said, you ladies are amazing. I'm like, we don't go on the stream. We just talk on the phone. And so they would do all these great stream cleanups. So I said, you're never too old. And so I'm going to leave you with the last thought from Margaret Mead, who's probably, she's got a lot of great practical quotes, but I'm sure you guys have all heard this one, but this is what motivated me in my younger years. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
We probably have time for some questions. If anybody has questions, you can use the mics. They're actually operational today.
So let me ask you guys, how many of you guys have actually done Azawatn League stream monitoring? That's fantastic. That's really good. So for those of you who didn't raise your hands, maybe those who did raise their hands can make friends with the person who hasn't done it. And take them out in the creek for themselves.
I know, I turned it on.
So I think with social media, that when I started at the Azawatn League, there was no such thing as social media. We had slide carousels. I had to carry around these slide carousels. Remember those? And I remember specifically wanting to make a slide with words on it. And I had to take it to a special photography company to put the words on the slides. And this was, I mean, I still have those carousels. I have slides of bugs. But I know. I actually, but now that I'm UVA, I got my UVA grad student to digitize all of them for me. However they do that. But you really had to rely on word of mouth. Today we are much more of a digital community. People text, people post things, they use Instagram, and so that's great moving that direction. But never forget that the best way to really get people to stick with something is face-to-face. That six-pack method, that one-on-one, that FaceTime is what really hooks them. And so with volunteers, to the degree that you can just pick up the phone and say thank you, or have that person in your chapter who just likes to yak a lot be the one in charge of calling everyone and saying thanks. That goes such a long way to keeping people motivated and wanting to come back and do more. And for those people who simply want to just do a stream monitoring project, if they don't want to do more, that's fine too. Thank them as well. So with that, I thank you all for your good attention.